Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me and see me. I'm Aisha Latta, and welcome and thank you for joining us for the online Minerals to Metals Forum hosted by the Southern African Institute for Mining and Metallurgy. Today, we're going to have the third session of the Economic Succession Planning Webinar Series, and this will be a continuation of the previous session that we had on the National Mine Closure Strategy. We have an esteemed panel with us today to discuss this very important topic, and I know that our participants as well are really do have their hands on the pulse. So let's see, we've got Setsedi Rasapai, a committee member of the Letsekleng Land Committee. We have Mariette Leferink, the CEO of the Federation for Sustainable Environment. We have with us as well Ruben Masenya, the Director of Mine Closure for the DMRE. We have with him Jonathan Vieren, the Head of Mining Practice at Webber Wentzel. Carla Hudson, the Program Manager for the Mine Water Coordinating Body. And last but not least, we have Stefina Mudau, the Head of the Environmental Department at Minerals Council.
Aisha's introduced the panel. I just want to go through very quickly what the objective of today's session is. We had a discussion, I think in June or July, the first round of the National Mine Closure Strategy, and since then, the mine closure strategy was gazetted in May, and it was gazetted in May, and the comment periods expired sometime towards the end of July. I do have a presentation here, but I'm not going to go through that. Just let me talk to it. Since then, the comments have been analyzed and received, and we're looking at what feedback we got from the people who took the trouble to comment, and we're now going into a second round of comments, or second round of consultation. The way that this is going to work is that instead of just sending out or gazetting the document and waiting for people to respond, as happened the last time around, we're going to focus on the issues and the points that were raised in the comments that we received back. And so we're planning a series of workshops, webinar workshops, where we will be going through specific constituencies to address specific issues with those specific constituencies. So we'll be going, first of all, to government, where we're consulting with the key government departments, the Department of Environment, Department of Water Affairs and Sanitation, and possibly Department of Agriculture, and get their feedback and their concerns. And their concerns will be around issues like the financial provisioning for the proposed the new mine closure strategy, which we need to iron out before we go back to the broader stakeholder base. So the broader stakeholder base will obviously be industry, which have commented fairly copiously and comprehensively. The environmental organizations like the Federation for Sustainable Environment, and we're privileged to have Mariette Leferink with us today, and she's going to talk to her issues. We've got to go back to the civil society organizations, the communities, to organized labor, and deal with them on their specific issues in caucus, and then come back and incorporate those issues and the remedies to those issues into the draft 2 of the National Mine Closure Strategy. So at this stage, we're looking at upward of 10, probably as many as 20 odd webinars that we're going to be having on specific issues. And we will be, I'll ask Aisha if she wouldn't mind notifying this particular group, and you would be welcome to join any of those specific, of those constituency specific webinars. But we would really like to do this, A, proactively, B, to deal very, very specifically with any issues that arrive, and then to B, the challenge is always to capture in 25 pages, which is all that we're allowed by the government gazette to get the concepts across. We will start this process sometime early November, and we will finish it towards the end of February and then the end of March. So we hope to cover as many people as possible during that period. So it's direct interaction with the stakeholders, it's direct feedback from the stakeholders, and it's going to be a collaborative effort of actually trying to resolve the issues of the different stakeholders. I did see a chat there from Charlene, I beg your pardon, Charlene, hi. Yes, we do include the junior miners as well as the industrial minerals. And so I'll feed back to you on that and how we're going to do that. But there are a number of junior miner organizations like SAMMDA, which has been around for a long time. There's the junior mining desk at the Minerals Council that will engage. But any of the other groups that are involved in small-scale mining that we can identify, we will include them if we are aware of their existence, and very often we can't. Asparsa, yes, I used to be a member of Asparsa, so we would include them, yes. Any other questions? Thanks very much. Okay, so the way that we're going to handle this afternoon's discussion is that we've got the same panel as we had last time, with one minor amendment, is that Bruce Dickinson from Webber Wentzel was unable to get here on time. He can join us at 2:30. But Jonathan Vieren, the head of mining practice for Webber Wentzel, has very, very kindly agreed to step in for Bruce at very short notice, and he will be giving the legal practitioner's view. So on the panel today, we've got the mining industry represented by Stefanie Madao from the Minerals Council. From communities, we've got Sechedi Rapsapai, we have Jonathan Vieren from legal practitioners, we've got Maria Liefring from environmental activist organizations, we've got Carla Hudson from the Mine Water Coordinating Body, who will comment on this very, very tricky water issues that we need to address. And each of them are going to give 5 minutes of their view on the issues arising, and then we're going to try by 2:30 to open it up to the forum for discussion. Are there any other questions before we kick off with Sechedi? None. Okay, Sechedi, if I can just give you the stage, what we would like to hear from you is how you as communities, Sechedi sits on the Lesotho Land Council, who have been involved in a fairly fractious confrontation with the mining company for the last 8 years. They've now come to a settlement with the mining company, and they are now dealing with internecine issues within the mining company. But the settlement was, to a large extent, premised on the question of post-mine sustainability for these communities after mining. So Sechedi is very familiar with economic succession planning. He's familiar with the mine closure strategy, and he's very active in his community and in organizing the community to participate in these discussions. Sechedi.
Thank you very much, Prof, and good afternoon to everyone. Indeed, Prof, we want to express our appreciation on the progress that has been made from the government side of things and the other stakeholders' input with regards to the mine closure strategy. Of course, what I don't see coming out clearly is the involvement of the women in particular. There are various women formations. Why women in particular? I will recall that these are people who are taking care of the family, also to speak, feeding the families, using the very same land, the involvement of traditional healers as well, because when the land is damaged, they are not able to access traditional medicine, which is used by a very huge majority of our African people. So it's very important when we do the stakeholder analysis, who has to be involved, we broaden it as far as possible so that we capture the views around food security and many other uses of the land. One other thing that I've emphasized is that we need to work with the NPOs, like the Mauritius one. They need to come on board and empower societies or communities on their rights, basically. It doesn't help if they do it from their level. We want to see cohorts within the communities. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that the strategy also needs to be incorporated into the offerings of the mines in terms of the social and labor plan on community human resource development, like your section 18.2. It should be mandatory that the mines, empowers the communities about their rights, the do's and don'ts. And over and above, we'll also see the mine closure strategy being part of the requirements for licensing. We only have the mine works program or the plan of the mine. We only see the social labor plan and environmental management program is the requirement. Into the future, we'd like to see the mine closure strategy forming part of the requirements the mine should indicate right at the beginning. And also noting the importance of regional economic development. What are the priorities post the closure of the mine? For instance, in my area, agriculture is secondary to mining. Is there any direction or emphasis towards ensuring that post the mine, life of the mine, there is a continued livelihood? We don't want to see the Stelfonteins, the west of the west, in the West End. So that is our inputs, Prof, all in all. But the bottom line is that let's broaden the stakeholder participation from all walks of life. Thank you very much. That is my input.
So Jerry, thank you very, very much indeed for that very cogent and comprehensive input in the short time we had available. What I'd like to do is to actually hand over to Ruben Messenia, who's Chief Director, is Director for Mine Closure for the DMRE, who is with us today. I'd like Ruben to please just come in and talk to the group about, from the DMRE side, what they would like to get out of this consultation and basically their view on the way that we want to structure the consultation, this very proactive, comprehensive approach that we'd like to take. Ruben, the floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Prof. Let me take this opportunity to thank South African Institute for Mining and Metallurgy for inviting the department again, so that we can clarify, I think, what Prof has mentioned with regards to how we are thinking we are going to involve everyone else, as well as also making sure that your comments, because of, I think some of you have been in platforms where I had indicated that this document is not a government document and it's not a departmental document, but it's rather a document that has to address key issues looking it from communities, looking for interested groups, looking it from the legislative instruments that are there, because of, I'm sure most of you have realized that the document actually is covering other legislation. So hence our consultation, I think Prof has just mentioned, we are going to try and make sure under the current circumstances, we maximize the potential of consultation. It's going to be tough. I know in some instances we'll be forced, like for instance, if we talk about our communities, we have to discuss with our communities, but webinar might not work in that instance. So we will be forced to do some physical consultation. And you know, when we fully finished with the final document, like as I said earlier, it has to be our document. Prof has mentioned that we are also going to, I think government stakeholders, we've discussed with them, some of them, they've already gave our comments, but we are still going to engage further so that at the end of the day, I mean, if we talk about CSI, it's something that is not even legislated in mind, but we have to make it possible that, you know, that money that needs to go towards addressing the issues of post-mining. So we will make sure that also with them, there will be a lot of discussions where if amendments needs to be made, like as you are all aware, this is just a strategy for now. The plan of the department is to make it a policy. So policy, obviously, we have to, you know, open all pieces of legislation and make sure that they align so that implementation can be seamless, which is what we are intending to do. That's why also on our discussions, there's going to be municipalities. We'll be engaging municipalities because of the issue of SLPs. As you are aware that municipality has a huge role to play in that. Obviously, again, there are also other key stakeholders that we have to include. I think colleagues have also mentioned earlier about the importance of women. Yes, the strategy in our consultation will take note of those, and so that we make sure that when we unfold or finalize the document, all key stakeholders are included. But I think for now, let me take this opportunity to thank everyone. Thank you, colleagues, for some comments that we received, but the journey is still going to be a journey that you will definitely be required. Please, let's assist each other so that as we finalize the document, eventually all of us, mining industry, and I know Prof has mentioned that they've already gave us a good input. I see Ms. Mudau is here. So I think also we'll need you as one of the important stakeholders because of implementation particularly. It's from the mining side. We are on the regulation side or regulatory side. And that's why it's critical for us to have all the stakeholders and consult them fully. But Prof, I think in the nutshell, let me just not deliberate much. This is a meeting that we came to unfold what is our intention and unfold with regards to exactly what is it that we are looking forward in terms of the stakeholders participating. But yeah, I think let me just pause it there. We'll get questions, obviously, as we are using the chat session on the side. So I think we'll be noting most of the comments as well, so that when we move from here, remember, we are still addressing the ones that you written formally to us. So when we move here, obviously, we are going to join all of them. And as we consult you, we are going to try also and share with you how far we are in addressing your comments and pick up more so that, as I said, we can own the document at the end. Thanks, colleagues. And Prof, I think, thank you very much. Let me leave the platform for you there.
Thanks so much, Mr. Osini. I really appreciate your presence here today. I'm going to move on to Marietta Liefering from the Federation for a Sustainable Environment, who's given us a very, very comprehensive feedback. And Marietta, you've got a lot to say and 5 minutes to say, so let me just hand over right to you and put your viewpoints, the FSC's viewpoints on the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the privilege to participate in this important discussion. First of all, I just want to mention what I've previously mentioned on behalf of the Federation for a Sustainable Environment, that is regarding the certain loopholes that we have identified. I'll briefly discuss it. That is the lack of articulation between the closure requirements in the MPRDA and the process for winding up companies as set out in Chapter 14 of the Companies Act. Here, I just want to refer also to the proposed regulations pertaining to financial provision for the mitigation and rehabilitation of environmental damage caused by inter alia mining. Their provision is made for liquidators and business rescue practitioners to also implement rehabilitation plans and closure plans, but this will of course require some amendments to our existing legislation. The MPRDA at present places no special obligation or specific obligation on the court to determine whether a company applying for liquidation has applied for a closure certificate. Then with liquidation, of course, a company ceases to exist as a legal person. If no person legally exists, these obligations of mine closure and rehabilitation by extension cannot be enforced. Then another common practice that also identifies a loophole is pass the parcel, that is the selling of mines close to closure onto less resourced companies who will relieve them of the responsibility and liability of dealing with the problems of closure. And then what is also considered a loophole is that listed mining companies currently have the option of exiting a liability escalating venture by changing the controlling interest of the corporate entity holding the right. There is no state oversight of this process at present. I just want now to briefly refer to two other loopholes that we have subsequently identified. The one of these loopholes is that the requirements for remediation and mine closure in the MPRDA, the NEMA, and the National Water Act are similar, namely that a responsible person must take reasonable measures to prevent, control, and remediate the effects of pollution. Reasonable measures are not defined. Currently, we find that what mining companies consider as reasonable measures are at best just interim stabilization, such as wilderness status, the rehabilitation with regards to vegetation, phytoremediation, woodlands establishment, stockpiling for road build material. These cannot be considered reasonable measures for rehabilitation and mine closure. And then the final aspect I want to address is the fact that the extraction activities in the residue stockpiles, are they included in the mine closure strategy? The reason why we ask it is because mine, that is the verb used in the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act, does not include extraction activities in the residue stockpiles. Extraction of minerals from residue stockpiles constitutes processing that does not require a mining permit or mining right. This is established in the judgment in the De Beers Consolidated Mines case. It established that reprocessing of tailings are not subject to the control of the MPRDA and does not require a mining right or permit. The court found, for example, that tailings dumps are movable and the minerals, metals occurring in them do not occur naturally in or the earth, and therefore the MPRDA did not want to regulate tailings dumps. This is a quotation. Mining of a tailings dump is in fact processing. So the intention of the MPRDA was then to exclude tailings dumps according to the judgment of the De Beers case. So these are some of my questions and some of my issues that on behalf of the FSE we would wish the DMRE to address. Thank you.
Marietta, thank you very, very much indeed. And thanks so much for sticking to the time. You've got a lot that you've actually fed back into the process, and we will be dealing with your feedback on a point-by-point basis, as we will with all of the other feedback. To follow on from Marietta, I'm going to ask Stefina Madar from the Minerals Council. She's head of environment for the Minerals Council and was responsible for drafting the Minerals Council response to the National Mine Closure Strategy Draft 1. And she's got a lot of very valid points that I'd like you to address. Stefina, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the opportunity, and thanks immensely to the department for putting forward such a groundbreaking strategy. And again, thanks to SAIMM for organizing this webinar. I think the starting point of our contributions here, I'm not gonna dwell much in details on our submission because we've raised quite a number of issues of interest for the mining industry in response to the strategy that has been put forward. So here what I'm going to do is just to give you a synopsis of the key issues and primarily focusing on the recommendations that we think the department should try and integrate in the consideration of stakeholders' comments whilst incorporating those into the revised strategy going forward. And the starting point from my side is just again to express the full support by the Minerals Council to the regional mine closure approach and also the economic succession approach to mine closure that is coordinated at a regional level as prescribed in the strategy. And with our support, there are a number of issues that we have indicated in our submission, wherein we feel that the department should try and resolve those issues whilst revising the strategy or whilst considering stakeholders' inputs on the strategy. I think the first issue that I want to bring forward pertains to the definition of the closure region as to what constitutes a region. Yes, there is some reference to the integrated environmental impacts, the connectivity in relation to environmental impacts, and so on and so on. But given the fact that the strategy now brings in a new dimension to closure, which is basically moving away from looking at the environmental imperatives to also taking into consideration the social and economic aspects when a mining company approaches closure issues. So we feel that the definition that is provided in the strategy should clearly articulate as to what constitutes a region, and we strongly feel that there should be, a set methodology that is scientifically credible, which outlines the actual parameters that one should look at in order to say a region is defined in a particular manner. Another critical issue that we feel is lacking in the strategy, it's the clear articulation as to how the integration of the EMPR's social and labor plans and also CSI as to how is that going to be achieved. We understand those aspects are regulated from different legislation by different regulators, and for the objective of the strategy to be realized, that looks at closure from all those dimensions, from an environmental, economic, as well as social dimension. I think a clear roadmap as to how those concepts are going to be integrated, I think that needs to come out clearly in the actual strategy. Another critical point that we've raised in our submission, and that we are making a plea for the department to look at when they revise the strategy, pertains to the articulation of the roles and responsibilities. We understand the role of government in terms of them being the policy maker, and also the role of the mining companies in terms of ensuring that they close mines in a more responsible manner, and obviously in compliance with all the relevant legislation, and to a certain extent also going beyond what is required for in legislation. So with that, we are saying that there should be a clear articulation on the roles and responsibilities to understand who's responsible to demarcate the regional closure areas, who will, in terms of the mines that are collaborating in a particular area, who will be responsible to own and maintain a particular regional closure plan for the mine, and who will, make the ultimate decision as to what will be the ideal nature of the post-closure provision for socio-economic sustainability, and most importantly, how will the mining companies integrate into the already existing regional economic succession plan for each particular cluster, and what will be the fit for purpose post-closure land use or conditions be based on? Who will agree on that fit for purpose? Is government going to, is it going to be government, community, mining companies, and so on and so on? Another critical issue pertains to the regional mine closure fund that is being envisaged in the strategy. I think here the issue relates to the fact that there is already existing funds that exist for various purposes, like for instance, in terms of funding SLPs, mines have already committed projects to fund particular SLP projects. Again, the same applies to the funding responsibility for environmental issues. There's existing financial provision funds. Companies are already funding for their ongoing rehabilitation or concurrent rehabilitation through their ops budget and so on. And now the strategy is recommending the contribution towards a regional mine closure funds. The question that we have there is this a new fund over and above what the mines are currently providing for those aspects that I've mentioned earlier on, or does this mean the integration of the existing funds into the regional mine closure funds that is being envisaged through this particular strategy? Again, another critical issue pertains to the economic succession planning and the development of a sustainable post-closure mining economy and the post-mining economy. Again, here, the strategy is not clear in terms of articulating the role of government in facilitating the envisaged economic succession plan within the mining cluster and aligning that with the regional and national development plans. It is not certain as to whether will government provide the relinquishment of mining rights upon successful execution of these plans. Not much is indicated in terms of how will this individual success of each mine within the cluster be measured within a regional economic succession plan, and also the responsibility of government to resolve any conflicts that might arise from this particular collaboration. And in closing, I think another critical issue that should be looked at is the fact that the current legislation looks at individual mine closure, and the strategy is now proposing the regional collaboration and economic succession, which we understand that in that instance there should be a coordinated effort to enable companies in a particular region to be able to be issued with a closure certificate. So those mechanics around how are we going to discharge the closure certification process in the context of now companies approaching mine closure at a regional basis. I think with that contribution, I will end here. Thank you very much.
Stefina, thank you very much indeed. And I must again recognize the enormous amount of effort that you put into your response and the wide range of issues that you've raised. One point that I would like to make from your submission is that from government's perspective, we would like all of the stakeholders, but particularly industry, to come up and help us come up with mechanisms and modalities that are going to help us resolve these issues, not just basically to kick back and say, well, we don't agree with that. So in the sessions that we will have with you, and you and I have had this discussion, we will be dealing with the pragmatic implementation issues that are going to make the strategy work, not just second guessing what government may or may not do. So we're looking forward to going through your response paragraph by paragraph. That is going to happen. It's going to be an interesting discussion. We're running a little bit behind time, so I'm going to ask Jonathan Viren from Weber Wenzel to come in and give us the legal practitioner's view on how they see the implementation of the strategy working in the longer run. Jonathan.
Sure. Thanks, Prof, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to participate in this forum. If I could, my comments will be based in three basic areas. One would be coordination and compliance, plugging the loopholes, but I don't think I'm going to talk about that to save some time, because I think Mariette and Stefania have talked about that. And then finally, implementation of the strategy. So to begin then, I think one of the issues with the strategy, firstly, I think it's a very laudable document. It's certainly the way international best practice is moving in the industry. But I think what we need to do is take the debate away from a compliance issue into or a regulatory requirement into something that's more living, something that's more real. And I think that is something that we need to work on. So when this document becomes, the strategy becomes a policy, it needs to be schooled with an entire set of stakeholders within the mining industry to make it real. And then from a coordination perspective, and many of the speakers before me have touched on this, is that I do think that the strategy touches on a number of issues: economic, social, environmental. And I think those issues are administered by various government departments. And what would be required is some coordination at local government and local, national and provincial level in order to make that strategy work. And I'm glad to hear that Mr. Masenya has spoken about this, and there will be some sort of attempts to coordinate the policy between different government departments, because what you don't want to do is have something in the ether where DMRE is regulating or seeking to oversight over an industry which it's not supposed to regulate constitutionally. So that would be another important issue. And then finally, I think implementation of the strategy is important. A number of the speakers have mentioned that there are issues as to giving mining companies a further responsibility in a particular area. And I think there's a need for independence, because I think it does away with a number of issues, a number of concerns that have been raised, where a mine is sold to a smaller mining company who don't have deep pockets. And I think there may be a cure in implementing the strategy through an independent forum, as opposed to having a mining company coordinate. Also, mining companies are at different stages of development. Each of them has their own specific goals, so it may be difficult to align them. So one would need to have this independent entity sitting outside the mining companies to do what is best for a particular community or as a region, as it may be defined in later drafts of the document. And then I think it also helps in a different way as well, because more and more in the commercial legal framework, when putting together employment shareholder schemes or community schemes, we see that the communities and employees fight for independence. They want to control or be the masters of their destiny. And I think that creating that independent sort of forum would allow mining companies to be less paternalistic of what they do. And then I think in regard to implementation, one needs to look wider than simply DMRE policy. One needs to look at policies coming out of our different departments, or in this case, a different sub-department. I mean, if one looks at the changes in regard to power procurement, or with water procurement, or with sort of the hubbing approach in a particular region, I think those other policy documents that have been produced by other government departments should be looked at to be incorporated here, because I think that's the way you get easy wins from mining companies, because there is a benefit in coordinating. And with that, Prof, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks so much for that very cogent insight, Jonathan. We'll be back to you on that as well. I've left Carla Hudson till last, not because for any other reason that water is so central to anything that we do around mine closure. So I'm going to let her finish up the discussion from the panel, and then open up the panel for broader discussion. I just want to point out that we are running out of time, so I will make myself available after the 3 o'clock deadline if Camilla and Aisha are able to accommodate. Carla.
Thank you very much. I'm known for that I can talk fast, so I will just basically quickly list what came out of the Mine Water Coordinating Body. So basically the Department of Agriculture has mentioned that you must look at the SAIMM guidelines, which specifically looked at to minimize the unintended consequences from policy, initiative, regulations and legislation. So I don't know if you guys have actually had a look at it's the SEIAS guidelines. Then the other issue that Stefina has raised was the issue of concurrent closure and how that can get recognized. And then obviously the issue also land management and the economic succession. Then I'm going to talk very specifically about what's happening in Mpumalanga and the establishment of the Mpumalanga Green Cluster Agency, because I think that comes in very nicely with compliance and implementation and the whole coordination of how we're actually going to do this. Because as you all know, Mpumalanga is under the spotlight for a just transition. So everybody is scurrying around to actually understand what is a just transition with the coal mines, and then specifically the Eskom power stations that's closing, and what's actually happening to the communities that's left behind. So I think it ties in very closely with obviously mine closure and what happens after mine closure. So MWCB has actually joined the Impact Catalyst in January, and Impact Catalyst actually does look at Limpopo and the Northern Cape as well, specifically with this concept of economic succession. So with water in Mpumalanga as sort of the central enabler, we've looked at various projects, and I think from our side, from the MWCB side and the Impact Catalyst side, is how would these guidelines actually enable us to bring these projects to commercialization, because we're sitting with quite a few projects in the pilot stage, and we're not quite sure on how taking this to commercialization. And it's agricultural projects, it's industrial projects, and it's land management projects. So yeah, so that's basically my main question is it should be an enabling guideline to actually work with provincial government, municipalities, and then with projects that's already looking at economic succession.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Carla. One of the issues I'd like to raise, or points I'd like to raise about mine water, is that the mine water problem is different in different regimes, which is one of the reasons that we wanted to split up the country into different mine closure regions. Because they've all got different issues. We've got acid mine drainage issues in Mpumalanga. We've got a scarcity of water in the western eastern limb. There are water issues up in the Northern Cape, and so we can't. There's no single water problem. There's a whole host of water problems, and we also had a discussion about whether, in fact, the mine water coordinating body, which is currently focused on Mpumalanga, should be more generally represented. But then Jonathan also raised the issue that we've got too many regulatory and participatory bodies, so maybe we need to rationalize it. But the water debate is the most critical debate that we have right now. Right, thank you very much indeed, panel. I'd really appreciate the effort you put into it and for actually being here today. Can we please, Aisha, open up to the floor now and get some comments and discussion from the floor.
Yes, absolutely. I think that this is a vital discussion to have. And I see that we have a point from Mariette about the alignment between the ASM mining policy and the mine closure policy. So I suppose if there's anyone that could comment on that, I would also be interested to see how these policies kind of, if they do at all, speak to one another. Perhaps we could shine the spotlight on Jonathan because he spoke a bit about integration and policy alignment. Have you seen these two policy documents speak to one another at all? And then we also have Anthony Bowen. So I'll hand over to Jonathan quickly if he has a comment on that, and then I'll hand over to Anthony.
Yeah, sure, Asha. I mean, I think I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer that question. It's probably something that's probably aimed at a representative from government as to whether there's coordination between the policy. But I think at a general level, what we can't do is drop policies in a vacuum. And I think to some extent, we need to look at other government policies and where they're aimed at, because I think what you don't want to do is have a multiplicity of compliance requirements. And I think with an issue of economic succession planning, I think it's a more real issue. It's not about ticking the boxes. And I think that's something that we gone wrong with. I think we need to take the debate out of simple regulatory compliance and look at it as it's termed, succession planning. What is the industries and what is viable that comes after mining that's sustainable? And I think Mr. Masenya has his hand up.
Yes, I'll hand over to Masenya to respond to that specific question, and then Anthony, sorry, let's see.
Thank you very much, Aisha, for that. I think the critical thing from government, I think colleagues might obviously take note that we are trying to streamline our policies. One environmental system was one of it, and that is why flowing from one environmental system, it's the national mine closure strategy. So we obviously, as we'll be consulting, I think we've highlighted that we are still going to consult further, but we've consulted with whoever we saw fitting that in their policy for this to be implemented effectively and efficiently. So there should be, it's critical to have alignment because of we don't want to implement laws in silo effect, because of previously that's what has happened. AMD, it's exactly the end product of silo effect with regards to when you are looking at the requirements for the Department of Water. I think they've changed their name. They've changed it a couple of times, but the Department of Water and Sanitation, that's how we called it. So we had long discussions with them. We've tried to align. We are still going to try. And that is why we are opening up to say, colleagues, before it becomes a policy, please, your guidance, your advice, your special inputs or your specialist inputs, it's key to us, so that by the time it becomes a policy, it had already been aligned properly and it's able to address issues that you want to address. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Anthony?
Thank you, Asha. Yes, I'm in the small-scale mining environment, and everything that's just been said by Mr. Masenya and Prof. Michael, as well as Jonathan, is very welcome news. If we can slim down the legislation and the requirements, I think it's going to go a long way to getting people to comply. Let's really, it's a request from my side, from the small industries, if we can make it easier to comply, I'm sure there's going to be a lot, people are going to do it a lot more willingly, and we won't have to have so much regulation. So because at the moment there's an absolute multitude of policies and regulations that need compliance. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. So I would like to invite Jabu Kaba onto the panel to just discuss his points there. I see it's a hefty point, and I think we'd like to hear your voice on this. So if you wouldn't mind coming forward.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank also to Prof for chairing the meeting. Let me take the opportunity. It's my first time to interface and interact with the proceedings. Very much appreciate the opportunity that we're given. It's Jabu Kaba from SAIMM, Southern Africa Miners Association, a representative body for the community of ex-mine workers all over SADC. I come from South Africa, Eastern Cape in particular. There were interesting inputs, particularly from Ms. Mudau and I think Jonathan, in relation to the integration of critical imperatives, your environmental imperatives, your social and economic imperatives. My particular interest would be that from the presenters, to what extent, based on our view and how we view the current draft policy, to what extent an attempt has been made to broaden particularly the focus on teasing down social imperatives in relation to the labor sending areas, because there's a constant bias in the sector, particularly when we look at the social imperatives, we only primarily focus on the mining operation hosting communities, whereas the socio-economic impact pertaining to the whole mining operation happens to impact, particularly when we look at it from the health perspective, population management perspective, it kind of seriously impact the labor sending areas. So to what extent is the policy covering that particular space, so that we balance that within the context of post-mining rehabilitation and the post-mining closure arrangement? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jabu, for your contribution. I think, would one of the panelists like to raise their hand and address the point? Otherwise, I see Michael. Hi.
Sorry, I did have my hand raised. I would like to address that on two counts. The first count is on the labor sending areas. One of the big issues that we have at mine closure is that it tends to be focused, and this is the key driver behind the national mine closure strategy. At the moment, mine closure is focused on physical rehabilitation of mines once mines closed, and there is no attention given to social rehabilitation of the mining dependent communities. And when so we deal with that very, very explicitly in the national mine closure strategy. But where people tend to look at the mining dependent communities have been those communities that are in the host areas, the doorstop communities around mines, where in fact there is a huge body of former mine workers that are in the labor sending areas that are not getting the attention that they require at the moment. So this is very much a focus in the national mine closure strategy to look at all mining dependent communities, not just those that are in the immediate vicinity of the mining company. On the artisanal mining side or the small scale mining side, there are a number of cogent issues that we need to deal with. One is the formal, if you want to call it that, the formal small scale mining sector. And the other is the zama-zamas, and there are tens of thousands of these around the country, and it is a major problem that is very difficult for us to deal with in the national mine closure strategy, because it spans many areas like policing, and so we haven't dealt specifically with zama-zamas at this stage, but we are very cognizant of the restricted capacity of small scale mining companies to deal with rehabilitation, to participate in the regional collaborative development programs. And we do deal with small scale mining specifically in that context.
Thanks, Mike. Is anybody else on the panel interested in putting some input on that point? Perhaps, oh, there we go. Okay. Setsedi, let's have you first, and then we'll have Ruben.
I think Jabu has raised a very critical issue. It's very evident the effects of mining does not only affect, so to speak, host communities. You know, the overlaps as far as the what you call labor sending areas. It might not necessarily be the Eastern Cape, but Southern Africa communities. It will be interesting, maybe from Jabu's side, to also help in terms of inputs. How do they see mining communities contribute? And also the Minerals Council, I know companies, for instance, the Anglo Gold has had some plans and intentions of doing some projects in the former labor sending area, and many other companies. It's an interesting thing to do and observe. But at this stage, I will strongly urge the Minerals Council as the coordinating body of the mining companies to really come up with a position in that regard. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think colleagues in the strategy, yes, there's a couple of things that we didn't highlight because of, like, as what we've mentioned with regards to the limitation that you can publish. But within government, like as I said, within government we did have challenges, a lot of challenges, and if you were to look at, for instance, illegal mining, which actually one could say that in our strategy we can deal with it. I think within the department as well, colleagues might be aware of the small scale mine policy that has just recently been published. So we've tried obviously to align it, and so that some of the other issues like the illegal mining, I think Prof has just nibbled a bit to say that within government, there are also other forums that they've just recently done their strategy. I think colleagues can be aware with regards to the joint efforts that SAPS, Intelligence, Hawks, DMRE, and other role players to deal directly with illegal mining, but not illegal mining. I think there's two, like a professor has mentioned. The small scale document policy deals with another form, but the one that has syndicated with it, of serious crimes, that one is being dealt with from another angle. So I just wanted to also highlight that part to say, yes, we know what you are saying, I think, and we appreciate the points that you are bringing out so that we can test our strategy to say, fully has it addressed all other issues, but also other issues that you are bringing to us. I think one can commit to say as well in other forums, like for instance, if it happens that in our discussion, we cross paths with other key policies that are there to assist us to address all issues fully, we will then be able to know them and make sure that it's addressed accordingly. Because of those forums, we are also taking part of. Thanks. And sorry, just before I see there's a question also on the chat box. It's pertaining to say, are we going to do the same category as what has been done in the mine water management policy? Look, from our discussions with the key officials that are dealing with or who are dealing with this policy, we had provide them the chance to advise us. They only advise us on other nitty-gritties, but I think this one of category, I don't see us having an issue in looking at it. We'll look into it broader to make sure that at least we are not using different names that can end up making our colleagues to comply or difficult to comply because of when there's confusion of names. And if we can really align, I think we will look into that. It's one of the things that we'll also look into. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruben, for your input. I see Michael. Let me hand over to you.
Well, actually, we're out of time from a chair's perspective, but I just want to reiterate that I'm happy to stay online for as long as the discussion wants to continue. I'm not sure whether any of our other panelists have the same luxury, but if you would like to continue, I'm happy to do so.
I think we do have a little bit of leeway from Camilla's side, and maybe she can just give us a hard deadline for when she needs to close the session. Otherwise, we can continue the conversation if there's other points that need to be raised. I don't see other questions in the chat, but people can definitely just raise their hand and address us if they're part of the participants that have accepted the panelist invitation. Yeah, I suppose from my side, I'm very interested to know what it means to formalize a sector, especially considering the kind of aims that we have with the mining closure strategy. How are we going to move into a space that's been kind of occupied by a certain fluid organizational group that might not be willing or interested in formalizing? And I suppose my question is, what engagements have you had on this front? What kind of plan do you have to speak to people on the ground level? And maybe we can get some input from other people that are here that might have experience with this as well.
So I'm going to basically just leave that to say that once we are arranged and we have channels to organizations on the ground, so we do deal, we will be dealing with organizations like Makua, with BUA, Benchmarks Foundation, who typically represents the informal sector and do so competently. But we've got to go through those organizations. It's very difficult if you look at the extent of illegal mining. to identify responsible representative groups that we can actually get coherent feedback from. So if you have any bright ideas, please let us know and we'll discuss this offline.
Will do. Thanks, Mike. I'm going to put my hand out there and ask people to come forward with their points. I don't see, I see a point from Mariette. Hi, you're welcome to unmute and share.
I have missed a little bit of the comments, but if you were referring to artisanal and small scale mining, I think one of the key representatives of small scale mining and artisanal mining is the organization referred to as NAM. It's the National Association of Artisanal Miners. They are being assisted by the Legal Resource Center, and they have a very pragmatic approach towards legalizing artisanal and small scale mining, and they've had high level engagements with the DMRE. So perhaps if you have an interest, I can put you in contact with the chairperson. His name is Sean Lathoka, and he's of NAM, National Association of Artisanal Miners.
Thank you so much. I'm sure Michael would also appreciate connecting. I think that's a really crucial point to contend with and address properly. We've got Graham with his hand up.
Hi, everybody. I don't know the proposed standards that well, but do they deal with a case where people have dormant tailings facilities or areas of the mine they say they're going to come back and mine and therefore can't rehabilitate? You know, if you fly over South Africa, there's hundreds of unreclaimed tailings facilities where people are not doing anything, and the same might apply to surface mining or closing of shafts. So I'd recommend there's some time limits proposed, something like 5 years or 10 years. So if you don't use something or have it really in your mind plan, that you need to then take it to closure.
I'll hand over to Mike and then Ruben.
Fine, thanks. That's a very good question. And one of the issues that we face with many of the mining companies, and Marietta has referred to it in her discussion today and at length in her feedback, so I'm going to ask her to comment. But very often it's easier and cheaper to keep a mine under mothballs and under care and maintenance than it is to actually close the mine. And for that reason, we want to put limits. We understand that economics change and situation change, commodity markets change, and so that there are legitimate reasons as to why mining companies do put mines under care and maintenance, waiting for better days. But where that system is abused to prevent to actually just defer closure because of the cost of closure and the difficulties of closure, that's really where we're targeting an intervention, saying there's got to be a time limit where the closure, the mothballing is reviewed. I'm going to ask Marietta after Ruben to please just talk to that, because she's got some very sound views on that.
Thank you, Michael. You've paid me a compliment. I'll try my best, but I know that in the recommendations of the mine closure strategy, and these recommendations I fully support, it mentions that operations which are under care and maintenance must be maintained in a way that all critical mining infrastructure be kept in an operable condition, or that future resumption of operations is not sterilized through the destruction or removal of critical mining infrastructure. I think that is an extremely prudent recommendation, because what has happened in the case of the Mintails group of companies is that the gold treatment plant, with a value of 3 billion rand, had been within a period of a few months been looted to the ground because there was no security to protect that very vital infrastructure to allow for sustainable future mining in that area. Then another recommendation is that non-critical infrastructure and equipment must be deployed where possible to economic diversification projects and used in the implementation of the closure plan. And again, adequate security must be provided to protect infrastructure and equipment and prevent illegal mining. I think that is extremely important. Where a company is in liquidation or business rescue, then the liquidator and the business rescue practitioner must then make provision for the security, the protection of these areas, and to also make sure that there is access control, mitigation and management measures in place, because often in these warehousing of tailing storage facilities, we find that there is no access control, no mitigation, no management measures, and also no warning signs.
Thanks, Mariette. Ruben?
I think my two colleagues have just said it. I wanted to highlight the points that they've just highlighted because of, I think, where we are sitting at. I think it's an issue of the legal, I think on our part, starting from MPRDA. There's not clear indication as to exactly how long must you place the operation under care maintenance. And in the process, I think we've noted in the strategy to say that in the process, there are a couple of things that are affected. I mean, if you were to look at dumps, one would have generated jobs that would then be able to sustain some economy around the area, or come up with any other land use that will then benefit people surrounding that area. So I think it's a legislation gap. We've noted it in the strategy to say it needs to be addressed in the MPRDA. But within the DMRE, there has always been discussions. So as we are aware about our bill, we are hoping that possibly as soon as everything's finalized, this particular part as well, as we've discussed internally with our colleagues, we are hoping that it will be addressed, that legal part, to at least remedy even the issue of care maintenance, so that at least when we proceed, we can know that these issues that we know that are impacting, it might be on a region, which is what we want to do as an approach. So they then be dealt with accordingly. And when we move to policy, all legislative gaps are closed and addressed accordingly.
Thanks, Ruben. Mike, I see your hand is up. We've got 5 minutes left.
Right, quick one. I want to go back to Graham's observation and question, which was a good one. Part of the problem that we have with dumps specifically in tailings dams is the classification of dumps and tailings dams under the mining permission as to whether they are a resource or whether they are waste. And so I'd like either Jonathan Viren, I know that Marietta's got some answers to that, or Ruben to actually just address that specific issue for Graham, because I think it's a very important point he's raised.
Mariette, would you mind putting input, and then Graham?
Yes, I think my input is the same as what I have mentioned regarding the definition of mine in the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act. If it is a residue stockpile, in other words, if it contains the waste from a mining activity, then it is classified as a waste. Although there can still be residual gold or uranium or what other material or mineral can still be extracted. But I just want to emphasize again, in the De Beers judgment, it stated that the MPRDA did not want to regulate tailings dumps. So, and the reprocessing, therefore, of a tailings dump is not subject to the NPRDA and does not require a mining right or permit. Why I have an interest in this matter is because Anglo Gold Ashanti, it's now Harmony Gold, they operate mine waste solutions. Mine waste solutions is reprocessing the historic tailing storage facilities within the Kosh area, the Klerksdorp area, but mine waste solutions does not have a mining right. And when I questioned that, we obtained legal advice that they do not need a mining right, and because they do not need a mining right, they also then are not subject to, for example, the social and labour plan requirements, and they are also not subject to the financial regulations. I can make this available to you because it was made available to me by ENS, the lawyers.
I think that'd be very helpful. I can share it to the MTM members as well as the SAIMM group. Ruben?
Thank you very much, colleagues. Yeah, I think these are critical points for us because of, part of these, I think, as we were implementing one environmental system, we thought that we'll deal with it accordingly. But this issue of residue deposits, our understanding is that residue deposit, I think, in line with the court judgment, to say a residue deposit belongs to a mine. And I think in the MPRDA, the mining area is clearly defined. And our understanding has always been that residue deposit must form part of mining. We know that when we've done one environmental system, we have moved to that part to Waste Act. But later on, as we sit down as regulators, then we realize that that needs to be moved away from the Waste Act, but rather be able to be regulated under NEMA, and of which, when it is regulated under NEMA, the competent authority is DMRE. So our understanding is that if it comes, or like as I just explained, it needs some sort of permit. But I think the points that you've raised, colleagues, I've noted them. Maybe this challenge still needs us to further engage and re-emphasize and address it accordingly, so that when we then go to implementation, we have fully consulted on this issue and we've then dealt with it accordingly. But I note the points that you just highlighted, and we'll be very glad to have more other information pertaining to this issue. Thanks.
Thanks. Terry, you've got your hand up. Over to you. We just need to unmute.
Yeah, thanks for the platform, and great input from everyone around the table or around the screens around the country. Definitely we need further engagement on this. And Aisha, I don't know what UCT is doing. Are there any studies that you're doing? Because I'd definitely like to be involved in those. One of the models that we are looking at is really integrating things like your EMPSLP CSI, which was raised today, that first of all, even the departments need to be integrated, and then obviously the community, and even look at enterprise development from have a different perspective to it, more from an investment. We get consultants that do ED, that's all good, but we need to start looking at investors coming to do ED for your SLP, for your CSI, and so forth. Because that way, the fact that one puts their skin in the game, it then makes it makes it sustainable. It makes it feasible as well. Because you get a lot of community projects that have gone by the wayside. The consultants have come in to collect the funds. The things are not sustainable. So we also need to change our mindset around that. We're getting training of communities just to tick the boxes for SLP, but you find that it's not talking to the mining charter 3 scorecard, so we definitely need to throw around ideas on how we can make everything integrated and mine with closure in mind. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for that input. I think that is a really strong point to end on, is that we need to mine with the end in mind. Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Michael for the last words, and then we're going to close the session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Aisha, and thanks for those who did stay on to complete this discussion. Aisha would like to think that we may have more focused follow-up sessions as we go along towards the end of February, end of March. If there is interest in the group, we can have very subject-specific discussions on those over and above the consultative workshops we are planning. But we will inform you of all the dates that we're going to be having the focused workshops, so that you can distribute them amongst this group. But thank you so much, Camilla and yourself, for organizing today. We appreciate it, and for everybody for attending.
Thank you so much. All the best for the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you.